but we've got more people starting to work with us, collaborate on developing. These are just people where the underlying theoretical work is kind of already done. So these are kind of firm collaborators, but there's many more people that are interested in getting involved. And hopefully after today, we kind of can grow the number of people who are contributing and using PyBaM. But it just gives you a sense really that, you know, people are picking this up, and we've got a large team of people working on different problems in PyBaM. And yeah, hopefully it gets more robust with a bigger user base. So what is PyBaM? So the intention really was to make a framework that you can use to build and solve battery models. And we want it to be fast, flexible, and modular. So it's not aimed at solving one specific battery model, sort of, you know, optimized for one model in the most efficient way. It's designed to have flexibility. You can build models, quickly tweak things, compare models. It's not quite as general purpose as COMSOL. We weren't trying to reinvent something like that, but it's somewhere between, you know, a specific solver for a specific model and something with the flexibility that lets you solve different models. So some of the things we've got already in there are sort of standard geometries like 1D cells, and we've also got some what we're calling 2+1D pouch cell models. And then we've got lots of the standard battery models you expect to see from the literature, things like single particle model, Doyle-Fuller-Newman model, and different lead acid models. We've got a library of different chemistries and parameter values that's gradually being built up, and that's one thing we're sort of happy to accept from new users, is people putting in new parameter sets to share with the wider battery modeling community. All of these models can be coupled to thermal models with the parameters depending on the temperature, so it's a coupled model, it's not just one way. Something we think is very useful in PyBaM is the experimental suite. So it's very easy for you to specify different experimental protocols that you might want to simulate for different voltage, current, and power control. And we'll see some examples later on at what the interface is for specifying that, but it's relatively straightforward. In terms of parameters you can provide to PyBaM, these are all provided in CSV files and can either be scalar quantities, or if you've got something that depends on a state, so diffusion as a function of concentration, you can provide that as a function, or you can provide that as some measured data. So it's quite flexible in the way you input different parameters into any of these models. And you can do other things like have graded electrodes or different particle sizes, for example. And we've started to work on ways of interfacing with external software so that you can use PyBaM in conjunction with other software to extend its applicability or extend its modeling capabilities. And we've got some examples of that as well coming up later on. So the structure of the models in PyBaM is that all of them are constructed from submodels. So the standard models that are in the literature, like the Doyle-Fuller-Newman model or the single particle model, sort of as illustrated in the figure in the top right there, these are built up from a collection of submodels, but they kind of exist in PyBaM as their own object. So you don't have to build the submodels and select all the submodels every time you want to use one of these standard models. You can just call it the standard model and it collects all the relevant submodels for you. So if you're just someone who wants to use a standard model out of the literature, they're just in there ready to go, very easy to access. But you can also use this submodel structure to create custom models. So if you want to pick different models for electrolyte, for what's going inside the particles, for the temperature, you can select all these different submodels, pick and choose the physics that you want, and create custom models. And this really is one of the powers of PyBaM, is that it lets you quickly implement different physics and compare what's going on and quickly develop models. So that's one of the main benefits of this software package and something we set out to do. So because of this structure, yeah, it really allows for plug and play physics. So as well as building a custom model from scratch, you can take an existing model and then quickly swap out one of the submodels for something else. So for example, you might take the Doyle-Fuller-Newman model and then swap in a graded electrode. So in this example here, we've got a distribution of particle sizes across the electrode thickness. And you can very quickly compare the two models with and without that feature and see how that affects the results. So, and you can readily include these models in full models or in reduced order models. So if you're someone who contributes a new piece of physics to PyBaM, that will be in the form of a submodel, and then people can take that submodel and use it in any model they like. So it really is sort of trying to minimize the efforts of people, I guess, in the battery modeling community. You can contribute the little piece of work that you're working on, and then that can be shared amongst the community with other models that are currently going on. So hopefully it sort of reduces the amount of duplicated work that goes on. So the structure of the underlying models in PyBaM or the underlying sort of back end of the whole structure of the software really is built around this pipeline that's shown on the right. So you write down your model, and the syntax for that is sort of symbolic. So you can literally write things like gradient of this variable and so on. So you can write your model equations without thinking about what the discretization is going to be. So if you're someone who develops models, but you're not so hot on different numerical methods, you don't really need to worry about that if you want to contribute to PyBaMM, because you just need to write down the model equations in symbolic form. And this creates an expression tree that sort of encodes everything that's gone on in that model. And then this model then walks through this pipeline. So you set parameter values in your model. So here we've just got a diffusion equation with some coefficient d, and then parameter values get set. So it might be 2 in this example, and that gets called in from your CSV file. So it's very easy to take your model and pull parameters in from different places. Then this gets discretized in some way. So at the moment, we've got the finite volume method in 1D and in the particles, and finite element if you want to do two-dimensional problems in the current collectors for our pouch cell models. So this gets discretized on some mesh, and again, you've got a choice over all these things. You can choose your discretization, and as people contribute more discretizations, you can mix and match those. You can choose your mesh. Something that this structure allows you to do is to calculate the Jacobian for any model via automatic differentiation. So this uses the package Casadi. So you can very quickly get the Jacobian for whatever model you want to build, even if you've built a custom model. This can happen automatically behind the scenes. And sort of in doing so, this gives you access to things like sensitivity analysis, calculating joints, and so on. So it can be thinking about exploiting it for doing that kind of thing too. Then once the model's been discretized, it gets solved by some time stepping routine. And again, we've got choice of different solvers for ODEs, DAEs from various different sources. And again, if you're a kind of person who's very into solvers, then you can write a solver, stick this into PyBaMM for everyone else to use. And then once this has been solved, there's then a whole load of post-processing and visualization methods within PyBaMM that allow you to quickly interrogate the data, plot the solution, and see what's going on, and start sort of using the results of your model to do some science. So to give you an idea of the kind of interface for using PyBaMM, it's very simple if you just want to run things out of the box. And later on today, we're going to see how to change lots of settings. But if you just want to run 1C constant current discharge of a particular model, it's just 5 lines of code. You have to import PyBaMM, you choose your model, in this case DFN, you put that into the simulation object, you hit solve, you hit plot, and then you get a standard selection of plots. And we'll see later on how you can customize some of these steps, like the plotting, for example, to get different variables out of the model. But if you just want the basic constant current discharge with this set of variables plotted, it's 5 lines of code. So you can be up and running really quickly, starting to use different models. So yeah, if you want to run with a different parameter set, you can just load a different library. So here we can say we're going to choose the parameter set from the paper Kim 2011, and then you can load that into the simulation. You can change the C rate if you want to. You can do a plot, and then here I've just shown a selection of those variables. And again, we'll go into this in more detail in the worked examples later. This is really just trying to demonstrate how easy it is to start changing the models in PyBaMM, changing the parameters, changing the settings. So the interface is very straightforward, and it can be scripted as well. If you want to do something a bit more exotic than a constant current discharge, then you can simulate an experiment, for example. And the way you do this in PyBaMM is to just specify your experimental protocol using a series of keyword strings. So it is as straightforward as saying things like discharge at C/10 for 13 hours or until 3.5 volts. There's lots of examples of these, so you can see what the kind of different keywords are, and we'll go through more examples of this later. But it's very easy for you to specify different experiments. And then, yeah, if you want to repeat an experiment numerous times, you can just multiply this list of instructions by 3, and it will repeat that experiment 3 times for you. And then you can just pass that into the simulation object, and away you go. And you can specify any current, power, or voltage control at the minute. It doesn't have to be constant. You can specify functions of time, for example. And for those of you in the Faraday Institution, you may have seen some standard experimental protocols developed by the Kendrick group. And these have been implemented. They're not publicly available yet, but within Faraday, we're hoping to be able to sort of standardly have library or have scripts that can reproduce all the standard experiments that you might want to use. So it's all set up for you automatically without having to specify it all yourself. So I've got some example solution times here for various different solvers. So this is for the DFN model, just a 1C constant current discharge, with the parameters from the Ecker paper. This is nonlinear diffusion in the particles. And so as I said before, with this pipeline process, you're free to choose different solvers, or whichever solver you like to use for your model. And here's some of the ones we've got in. So there's Casadi and IDA KRU all use all of these actually, sorry, use the sundials solvers in the background, IDA, but there are various different implementations of that. And you can see, some solvers perform better than others for a certain number of grid points or a certain number of states. But you get pretty good solution times for all of these solvers. And yeah, it's just to give you a flavour of kind of the solve times. And this is on my on my laptop, which isn't anything specialised. So that's kind of an overview of what's in PyBaMM and how you interface with it. And here's just some examples now of how people have been using PyBaMM. And in each of these, like a little code snippet, just showing you how to do some of the things that were done. So this case study is for a particular paper that developed a single particle model with electrolyte using some asymptotic techniques and did a comparison to other models in the literature. And there's just some results from the paper there. But if you look at the code snippet in the right, this is just showing you how easy it is to compare different models in PyBaMM. So if you're someone who develops reduced order models, what you probably want to do is compare them to the full model. And in PyBaMM, it's as easy as just creating a list of the models that you want to solve for and looping over them to solve. And then you can plot and pass all those solutions into the plot, and it will quickly compare them for you. Something else we've been doing in PyBaMM is looking at modeling of pouch cells and different geometries. So, for example, we've got this, what we call 2+1D pouch cell model, where in the limit of high conductivity, you end up with a series of one-dimensional problems at each point on the current collector in the 3-cell direction, coupled by a 2-dimensional problem in the current collectors for the charge, conservation, and temperature. So you end up with this collection of problems, and if you take a very high conductivity limit, this is actually well approximated by just solving a single averaged 3-cell model, as shown by these two images on the right here. So this is just starting to use PyBaMM to investigate some different cell geometries, and you can do this in PyBaMM just by passing some options to the existing models. So if you've got a model and you want to see how it performs in a pouch cell, you can pass the options current collector potential pair. So this just says I'm going to have 2 current collectors with potential on, and dimensionality 2 just means that's going to be a 2D problem in the current collectors. And then we've got some example results here for, this is a 10 by 10 grid on the current collector, so with a single particle model with electrolyte. So you've got 100 single particle models describing the behavior in the 3-cell direction, the electrochemistry, all coupled together through the current collector problem. And then you get results out like this for the potentials on the current collectors, the 3-cell current density and temperature, for example, in a single layer cell. Something else I mentioned at the start is that we're trying to make it easy to interface between PyBaMM and other software packages. So one example of this is some work I've been doing with Tom from UCL to do thermal modeling on cylindrical cells. And this couples PyBaMM with another open source software, OpenPNM, that's a sort of poor network model software package, not specific to batteries. And in this piece of work, we take tomography images of a real cylindrical cell, turn that into a problem of equivalent circuit model and thermal model for the problem in the jelly roll on the macroscopic dimension. And then locally for the electrochemistry, we use PyBaMM to describe what's going on, either with a single particle or a Doyle-Fuller-Newman model, whichever model you like. So we've got local electrochemistry described in PyBaMM, coupled with a global electrical and thermal modeling in a different software package, OpenPNM. And some example results here. Sorry, this figure's a bit blurry when it's come out here. But you can look at things like what's the current density in the current collectors in this roll. So here we've got a cylindrical cell with a number of different tabs. So you get higher current density close to where the tabs are. And on the right, we've got the temperature profile. So we've got cooling around the outside, so it's hotter in the middle. But this is just an example of how to couple PyBaMM with other software, such as equivalent circuit modeling, to then model larger length scale problems. So you can start doing pack modeling and things like this. We saw earlier some examples of experimental protocols. So here's just another example of doing sort of discharge rest, so a GITT type thing. It's got this current pulse here and the terminal voltage recovered on the right. So again, very specify. And you can also do drive cycles as well. So you can specify the current to be a function, either provided as a function or as data. So here we just say we've got some data, and this is for the US06 drive cycle. So we load that in as our current function in the parameters, and then you get the result shown on the left there. So we can simulate drive cycles as well. So there's lots more examples online if you go to our GitHub repository. So I'll just click through on this link now. So if you go to GitHub and get the examples here, and there's lots of scripts. If you go in the folder scripts, there's a whole bunch of scripts that do different things. So there's one here solving SPME, but in a stepwise fashion. So instead of solving all in one hit, you can do multiple steps in the solution, for example. But what's probably useful for a lot of people, if you go back, is the notebooks. So we've got a whole host of Jupyter notebooks that you can click through. In particular, we've got some getting started guides. So if you click through on there, tutorial 1 is just how to run a model, and you can go through and click through and see how to do that. And we've got notebooks that we're going to go through today, but a lot of the functionality is here in this notebook. So if you're not sure how to do something in PyBaMM, the first place to go is this examples repository, or this examples folder within the repository rather, and see if there's an example that does something similar to what you want to do and edit it from there. But you can always get in touch with us on Slack and Git, of course, if you still can't find what you need. Yeah, and then we've also got documentation for all of PyBaMM. So we've got API documentation for all of the various different functions that are within PyBaMM, and also a whole bunch of tutorials on there. But the notebooks are probably the place to look. But you can go to this read the docs page, but you can also access this through GitHub, which might be easier. So if you just go to our main repository and then scroll down past these files, you can just click on docs here,